During a game of Truth or Dare, my fiancée's first love, Olivia, directly asked her in front of everyone, if Sincere weren't in the picture, could we ever get back together? Just as someone tried to lighten the mood by saying it was just a joke, Victoria replied, yes, we could. Everyone present was utterly shocked and turned to look at me in unison. They fully expected me to flip the table in rage. Instead, I simply smiled and said, all right, since we haven't officially tied the knot yet, I'll be generous and let you two be together. A week ago, Ethan returned to the country, and my fiancée Victoria personally arranged a welcome-back dinner for him. On that same day, my father was diagnosed with coronary heart disease and needed bypass surgery. Overwhelmed, I lost my temper on the phone, accusing her of not prioritizing what truly mattered. Instead of understanding, she lashed back, accusing me of using the situation as an excuse, her voice dripping with disappointment and reproach. She hung up on me and blocked me immediately after. At that moment, I felt as though I no longer recognized the woman I loved. That was the first time Victoria and I had a major fallout. In the past, if we argued, I would always be the first to apologize, terrified of upsetting her. But this time, when I realized she had blocked me, I felt an unusual sense of calm. 3 days later, my mother called to tell me that Victoria had been crying. I knew this was her way of extending an olive branch. She always did this, never apologizing outright but finding ways for me to break the ice first. She'd invite me out for barbecue, suggest hot pot, or, failing that, show up at my parents' house crying until I softened and humbled myself. Then, as soon as I gave in, she'd smirk and ask, do you know what you did wrong? By nightfall, she'd transform into a kitten, lazily teasing me until I ultimately surrendered. This had been our dynamic since I first pursued her. I gave her my all without expecting anything in return. Being with Victoria meant constantly suppressing my own feelings, walking on eggshells to please her, as if I couldn't breathe without her. But yesterday, when she said, even your mom didn't blame me, so why are you making a fuss? Something inside me shifted. For the first time, I felt a profound imbalance. Victoria didn't understand how agonizing and helpless I'd felt standing outside that operating room. I may be a man, but I am also someone's son. I longed for her presence and support, but all I got was her indifference and blame. Soon after, she texted me, honey, do you remember what tomorrow is? Our third engagement anniversary, of course, I remembered. Each year I went to great lengths to plan something special, but Victoria always found my efforts lacking. Booking the best restaurants, gifting makeup, jewelry, or designer bags. None of it felt romantic enough compared to a perfectly timed social media post from Ethan. When I didn't immediately respond, she assumed I'd forgotten and playfully chided me. It's our anniversary. Never mind, you've always been the one gifting me things. This time, let me make it up to you. I've prepared a gift. Get excited. I replied with a single word, okay. Then I put my phone down and returned to reviewing a legal document. In the past, her words would have filled me with joy, but this time I felt nothing. After work, Victoria reminded me to pick up red wine and candles and wait for her. She texted me at 6 p.m., but by midnight she still hadn't come home. Worried something might have happened to her, I called her repeatedly, but she didn't answer. Finally, I opened social media to check with her friends, and that's when I saw Ethan's post, a lifelong soulmate, visible only to me. It was accompanied by a photo of a watch, the same watch I had been wanting for a long time. The moment I saw the picture, something inside me shattered, then slowly reassembled itself, piece by piece, until it was whole again. Calm, even. I suddenly felt a sense of clarity. To Victoria, Ethan would always matter more than I ever could. Strangely, though, I didn't care anymore. In the middle of the night, I heard the door open. Someone tiptoed toward the bed, bringing with them the familiar scent of her perfume. Victoria wrapped her arms around me, but just as her lips were about to touch mine, I instinctively turned my head away. Both of us froze, startled by my subconscious reaction. Any lingering sleepiness was gone. To avoid the awkwardness, Victoria fled to the bathroom, leaving her phone behind. The screen lit up with a message from Ethan. "Are you home yet?" Victoria had replied, "Almost." Ethan sent another message, "I can't stop thinking about you." She didn't respond. I scrolled up briefly and saw they'd been chatting every day. I wasn't interested in reading more. The constant buzzing of notifications was irritating, so I casually tossed the phone onto the couch. Once, their endless conversations would have driven me insane with jealousy. But whenever I complained, Victoria would immediately put up walls, calling me childish and disrespectful. As her fiancée, I was supposed to trust her, but as my fiancée, didn't she understand the concept of boundaries? Over time, I stopped feeling the need to say anything. A few minutes later, Victoria emerged from the bathroom, looking at the phone on the couch before hesitating. "Did you touch my phone?" she asked. I yawned and replied, "It's late." She took a sip of wine from the bedside table and said, "There's nothing going on between him and me." I nodded and closed my eyes, drifting off to sleep. I didn't hear the rest of her sporadic explanations. At last, after a sigh, the world fell silent. I no longer felt the urge to lose my temper or argue about principles and boundaries. No matter how useless it seemed, Victoria silently erased all the things I cared about, and even crossed boundaries. To her, my breakdown was nothing more than a joke. I was too tired from waiting, too exhausted from giving, always putting in more than I got back. The string was about to snap, so I chose to turn away. The next morning, when I woke up, I realized Victoria had somehow moved to the guest bedroom. When she saw me come out, she pointed to a suit hanging nearby and said, "Sincere, this is for you." I picked it up, glanced at it, and let out a bitter laugh. I won't even bother mentioning the color or style, but even the size is wrong. "Why bother giving me something meant for Ethan?" I said as I put on my jacket and reached for the doorknob. Victoria stopped me. "It's not what you think," she said. "He broke up with someone. He got drunk at the bar, and I helped him to a hotel. He threw up all over himself." I interrupted her. "Oh, really? So the clothes got dirty and you bought him a suit? Then, to make him feel better, you gave him your watch? And after he sobered up and had enough energy to post on social media to disgust me, you finally came home?" She frowned. "Sincere, do you have to say it like that?" A flicker of hurt crossed her eyes. "And how would you like me to say it?" I asked, smirking at her. She was silent, wearing that innocent expression, as if everything was somehow my fault. Victoria was genuinely upset this time. Despite living under the same roof, we now stayed in separate rooms. The only thing connecting us was a cat, Joy, which we had adopted together. I had awkwardly confessed back then, saying, "Let's take care of it together." Her eyes softened, and with a gentle smile she nodded, accepting my love. From then on, I fed the cat, and she cleaned the litter box. But these past few days, Victoria had been coming home late, so I kept Joy in my room. The little one seemed forlorn, lying on my bed, looking like it missed her. It was used to causing mischief in front of her laptop at this hour. Joy couldn't speak, but I understood its silent grievance. Unexpectedly, Ethan messaged me, "I can return the watch if you want. There's no need to be so petty, man." I ignored him. "I'm a bit of a neat freak. I can't stand other people touching what's mine." He sent another message. That was one of my lowest moments. A group of people mocked me for my failed marriage. Don't blame Victoria. I stayed silent for a while before replying with sharp words. "So all your friends and family were dead, and you had no one else to turn to but my fiancée?" Moments later, Victoria stormed out of the guest bedroom, pointing at me angrily. "What is wrong with you? How could you talk to Ethan like that? Let's break up." The last time Victoria said we should break up was when I accidentally broke a crystal cup Ethan had given her. She yelled at me for a long time, trying to comfort her. I said, "I'll buy you an identical one." But she exploded in anger. "Do you even know what it means to me?" Then she sent a text saying, "Let's break up." I panicked, calling her repeatedly, sending long messages to apologize and plead for her forgiveness. She stayed silent for hours before finally sending a voice message. In a mocking tone, she said, "What's this? Guys like you just love writing long, emotional essays to manipulate people. You deserve a slap. Fine, your punishment is to buy me a new bag. I froze, stunned for a few seconds before replying, got it. The moment I hung up, it felt like a truckload of cement poured into my chest, hardening instantly. When it came to Ethan, Victoria was always sensitive, as if he were some untouchable taboo. But so what? I didn't care anymore. I kept asking myself what I was even worth, why I was torturing myself to meet an impossible standard. Even when Victoria posted pictures on social media to provoke me, I felt nothing but clear skies. He helped her fix her laptop, saved her a parking spot, and even bought the same pair of shoes she liked on Amazon. She brought him lunch, picked up his parcels, and corrected errors in his work documents. Even during those days when Victoria traveled to major cities for her company's new project, and we didn't talk for 4 or 5 days, they still exchanged songs and jokes daily. I could feel it, no matter how deeply I felt for Victoria. Her indifference was slowly draining me. Finally, someone else couldn't bear to watch anymore. Olivia, a mutual friend, organized a gathering. I, who was never late, arrived 30 minutes late this time. Ethan, clearly annoyed, said, "Sincere, what's with the big attitude?" I glanced at him. He had been late countless times, yet whenever I asked about it, Victoria would sternly defend him, saying, "He's jet-lagged, or it's normal." I smiled faintly and replied, "Sure, this one's on me." We split into 2 tables. By some unspoken agreement, I sat with Olivia while Victoria and Ethan sat across from us. I ordered a beef hot pot base, one of Ethan's favorites. Victoria added, "No cilantro, please." I remembered the first time the 3 of us had dinner together. Victoria loved cilantro, so I purposely added a lot. She furrowed her brow ever so slightly and glared at me, instructing the waiter to bring a new broth. Ethan had grinned smugly and said, "Sincere, look how thoughtful Victoria is. When you like someone, you remember everything about them, even their eating habits." Under Ethan's taunting gaze, I clenched my fists. Although Victoria said he didn't know better, you can't blame him. I never touched cilantro hot pot again. Next to me, Olivia laughed and said, "Do all you guys hate cilantro?" Victoria looked at me surprised. I think at that moment, she finally understood why. What? She and I only ever ordered a half and half hot pot. She could forego cilantro for Ethan, while I would brave the spicy broth for her. Victoria was never the considerate person you claimed. She just reserved that for you. This thought had been stuck in my mind for so long. I couldn't understand why Ethan's every word and gesture always felt like a dagger to my chest, yet he wore an innocent expression all the while. Take tonight, for example. After we'd finished dinner, Olivia suggested Victoria and I head home together, but Ethan insisted on playing a game of truth or dare. When the bottle pointed at him, he retaliated by asking, "Victoria, if you weren't engaged, would we get back together?" The way he staked his claim was despicable. The room fell silent, everyone stunned. You could have heard a pin drop, and Victoria, the one being questioned, slowly nodded and said yes. Olivia, worried I'd lose my composure, instinctively tugged at my sleeve. But I just let out a laugh and said, "Well then, since the papers haven't been signed yet, I might as well be generous and let you 2 have each other." The gathering ended on a sour note, not because of me, but because 2 guys at another table slammed their hands on the table and stood up. One of them pointed at Ethan and yelled, "Pretending to be friends while acting like lovers, do you 2 think no one notices?" Victoria's face turned pale before Ethan even had a chance to defend himself. The other guy chimed in, "Don't invite me to gatherings like this in the future, and don't talk to me about soulmates. Emotional cheating is still cheating." I smiled but said nothing. I'd said the exact same words many times before. Every time Ethan would stay silent and Victoria would jump to defend him, and every time it hurt me deeply. But now, it wasn't that I didn't feel the pain anymore. It's just that the wounds had long since scarred over. Olivia's good intentions in arranging this gathering had ultimately been in vain. I took the subway heading west while they drove east. Neither of us looked back. In that moment, I felt like the most detached person in the room. A faint sense of melancholy washed over me, like the feeling of putting away something you once cherished, something that existed, was never truly joyful, and would never be again. I got off at my stop and slowly walked home. The chilly wind brushed past, and a single leaf drifted down from a branch, its path both natural and resolute. A premonition of a breakup. Victoria. It felt like it was finally time to let her go. I was already thinking about how to broach the subject when I opened the door to find her sitting quietly in the living room. Victoria spoke first, which was rare. "You've been in good spirits these past few days without me around," she said. I replied, "Yeah, you're busy and so am I." She seemed to be picking a fight, but I didn't want to engage. "Ethan insisted on coming over," she said, looking at me. Her words caught me off guard, and I suddenly realized she was trying to explain herself. In the past, whenever she was with Ethan, I'd feel a pang of jealousy. But now, the funny thing was, I didn't care. "It's only natural," I said, brushing her off, wanting to end the conversation. But she seemed hesitant, as if torn. In the past, I would have been dying to figure out what she was thinking, but now I felt nothing. Finally, Victoria mustered the courage to speak. "There's something I need to discuss with you." "Go ahead," I said, trying to hide my impatience. She bit her lip. "Ethan is my best friend. He's back in the country and has been job hunting. Staying in hotels isn't ideal." I immediately understood. She wanted Ethan to move in. Just as I was weighing how to refuse, Ethan appeared at the door with bags in hand. My blood pressure spiked. So, it was already decided. And she had the nerve to pretend to consult me? I turned to walk into the bedroom. As long as they didn't invade my personal space, I didn't want to make the breakup messier than it needed to be. But Victoria stopped me, saying, "Ethan's allergic to cat hair." I looked up at her, puzzled by her meaning. After a moment's hesitation, she said, with undeniable firmness, "You'll need to take Joy and stay somewhere else for a few days." The atmosphere froze. I laughed out loud. So the saying, "laughing out of anger," truly existed. Ethan chimed in, "Sincere, don't get the wrong idea." He had already started unpacking his luggage. "I know I've been a bother to you and Victoria. That's on me. Once I find a job, I'll disappear." The way he acted like he owned the place made me want to hit him. "Get out." The 3 words left both of them momentarily stunned. Victoria was the first to speak. "Sincere, I've already made compromises." She saw my face darken and softened her tone. "It's just temporary." After a few days, I cut her off, shattering her illusion. "This is our marital home, and as far as I know, I have veto power here." Victoria's face hardened. After a long silence, she glared at me icily and said, "Fine, this isn't the only property we have. Just don't come crying about being jealous later." She grabbed Ethan's hand and walked out. Watching their retreating figures, I tried to recall a time when I'd been jealous. It wasn't until I heard the door slam that I remembered. The last time had been when I slammed the door myself. They'd organized a karaoke night, singing love songs to each other with flirtatious glances, and I had walked in on them. I'd nearly lost it then. After the fight, Victoria ignored me, while Ethan's faint, smug smile infuriated me even more. Now, as they stormed off, I felt nothing but relief. This was closure, an end to the tangled emotions of the past and a moment of honesty with myself. I typed "Have a nice life" into the chat box. A red exclamation mark popped up. It seemed she was either still blocked or had been reblocked after I'd unblocked her. I was about to call when Victoria's dad called me instead. I prepared myself for a scolding, but to my surprise, he sounded frantic. Grace's health screening revealed that the tumor in her uterus was alarmingly large. By the time I rushed to the hospital, Victoria was already in tears, her face streaked like a weeping willow after a storm. The moment she spotted me, she threw herself into my arms. I stiffened slightly but maintained a stoic expression, saying, "It's nothing serious. Calm down. The surgery went even better than expected." However, Ethan had been a constant nuisance during this time, sending multiple messages. First, he complained about struggling to find work. Then he asked Victoria out for a meal, and when he found out that Grace's tumor was benign, he suggested hiring a caregiver. Victoria, furious, yelled into the phone, "Do you have any idea what it's like for my mom to undergo surgery?" When I signed the consent form, my hands were shaking. I was stunned by her attitude. It was a side of Victoria I had never seen before. She continued, her voice trembling. "Do you even know?" I cried nonstop in front of the operating room. As she raised her head, she spotted me standing a short distance away. Something seemed to click for her. She murmured, "Sincere, I think I've realized I was wrong." Those two words, "I was wrong," were ones I had waited so long to hear. But the apology I had once longed for had become distant and blurred, buried under years of constant repression. I had harbored a faint hope that Victoria might come to her senses and that we could reconcile. But during the week I took off work to care for Grace. I found time to finally get my 9-year-old impacted wisdom tooth removed. In just 30 minutes, with pliers, a hammer, and a grinder, I experienced a sense of renewal. That tooth had grown wildly in my mouth, causing me years of pain and pressure on my healthy teeth. At last, I had made the decision to get rid of it. I had endured enough of its unpredictability, and just like that tooth, I realized I had endured enough of Victoria. Whether she knew she was wrong or not, I was done. I felt nothing but emptiness. A week later, Grace was discharged from the hospital. Insisting she stay at our marital home for a few days, I busied myself attending to her every need. She choked up at one point, saying, "Sincere, I feel so at ease knowing Vicky is marrying you." I felt a twinge of melancholy but quickly masked it, replying, "I'll stay elsewhere for a few days. My cat might not be good for your health." She smiled warmly. "Oh, that's nothing to worry about. I don't mind at all. You shouldn't neglect your precious pet just because of me." Victoria, standing nearby, opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it, her head hanging low. As I packed my belongings, Victoria insisted on following me. I ignored her. After stowing my personal items and placing Joy into her carrier, I headed straight for the door. Victoria stood in my way, her pride barely intact. "Don't do this, please," she pleaded. I instinctively tried to pull the door open, but she leaned against it, demanding an answer. As I pushed harder, she broke down, hitting me in frustration. When I firmly grabbed her hands, trying to calm her, I froze. On her ring finger was a silver band. I had given her many rings over the years: gold, diamond, jade, but never silver. I had once told her that her ring finger should only bear a ring from me. A bitter laugh escaped me as I regained my composure. "Move aside," I said flatly. Victoria seemed to realize something, quickly pulling her hand back. Her voice wavered as she explained, "Ethan said hospitals have bad energy, so he gave me this for protection." I pulled out my phone and thrust the screen in her face. I knew this had to be another one of Ethan's twisted jokes, the kind that made him feel superior while leaving me silently fuming. And sure enough, there it was, a photo on his social media. Ethan was wearing the exact same silver ring on his ring finger. Victoria went silent. After a long pause, she muttered, "A silver ring doesn't mean anything." I didn't want to argue. Pushing past her, I left without a second thought. From then on, we returned to a state of mutual indifference. During this time, I poured all my energy into work. My dedication caught the attention of my boss, who promoted me to partner. Coincidentally, it was also my birthday, a double celebration. I proposed hosting a party to mark the occasion. After selecting a venue, my phone buzzed with a notification. Somehow, Victoria had re-added me as a contact. Her message read, "My mom went home this morning. Thank you for the gift you prepared." I thought for a moment before replying. It was the least I could do. Apologies for not having time to personally deliver it to your parents. A while later, she called. "It's your birthday," she said. "I bought some of your favorite dishes. Why don't you bring Joy home?" "No need," I replied. "My colleagues are throwing me a party." "Can I come?" she asked hesitantly. "That wouldn't be appropriate," I answered firmly. "No one's bringing their partners." In the past, whenever she had gatherings, I would tag along like a loyal dog. After a few instances, Victoria had frowned and told me, "If you're not invited, don't come. My friends and I need privacy to talk." I had countered, "Then why is Ethan allowed?" She had scoffed, "He's my best guy friend. How can you compare?" At tonight's party, I made a surprising discovery. As the drinks flowed and the atmosphere grew lively, one of my colleagues patted my shoulder and said, "Sincere, you know what we always say about you? You're great at everything, except you seem out of touch with the real world." I raised an eyebrow in confusion. A woman nearby elaborated, "You always go straight home after work and rarely join us for meals or outings. While you're incredibly helpful whenever there's a problem, you come across as aloof and unapproachable. But tonight, we've seen a different side of you." I chuckled. In the past, I had always rushed home, afraid that Victoria might be waiting for me. Too lonely now, why should I indulge in such needless affection? She has her girlfriends and I can have my own buddies. After our dinner gathering, this bunch of guys dragged me to a bathhouse where we bathed, got massages, and sang karaoke. Victoria called me several times, but I eventually set her number to Do Not Disturb. I had once offered to pick her up, worried about her safety walking at night, but she laughed over the phone, saying she had a group of friends escorting her, so there was no need to make a fuss. By around 11, we wrapped up, and Victoria said she was waiting for me in the lounge of the hot springs. One of my colleagues sent her my location. When I arrived, she asked, "You didn't drink too much, did you?" Seeing my flushed face, she moved closer to support me. "I'm fine, I didn't drink much," I replied. She drove over and insisted I not take the subway. On the way home, she softly remarked, "So this is what it feels like to wait for someone." I chuckled dismissively, pretending not to hear. When we reached the apartment complex I was renting, she tentatively asked, "Can I come up with you?" I frowned, feigning drunken belligerence, and said, "No need. My place is small, just enough for me and Joy. While I'm not around, why don't you check if Ethan's found a job and let him stay for a few days?" Victoria was clearly embarrassed, but this time she didn't get angry. Her eyes seemed to glimmer slightly as she said, "You're drunk." I sneered. Drunk words are sober thoughts. But from that point on, she started to change. I never expected that, as someone who had always bent over backward for her, I'd one day experience a reversal of fortunes. When my lease was up, I had no choice but to move back home. Out of nowhere, Victoria began to show concern for me, cooking meals, waiting for me to come back, even skipping her weekend outings with her girlfriends. But instead of feeling touched, I found myself increasingly uneasy. I told her, "You don't have to do this. I've been promoted and my work hours are unpredictable. I'll even have to work on weekends." She replied, "That's okay, just send me a message." She then started researching how to make nourishing soups. When she placed a bowl of chicken and fish moss soup in front of me, I was shocked at how delicious it was, on par with a restaurant's quality. Then I thought back to the time she nearly blew up the kitchen. Was it because she had been too distracted talking to Ethan on a long-distance call, or because she simply didn't care? I had to admit Victoria was putting in the effort, but strangely I couldn't taste happiness in her cooking. It wasn't just my sense of taste, something about all my senses felt off. I used to love the nights we spent entangled together, used to obsess over her every little move, used to tread carefully to win her favor. But now, as I looked at her face, it felt unfamiliar. Even when she deliberately dressed provocatively, I found myself oddly indifferent. Her every action began to disgust me, to the point of nausea. It turns out, sometimes you don't even realize you've stopped loving someone, but your body knows. A single tear slipped down Victoria's cheek, but I felt no pain for her. She wanted to sleep beside me, and I didn't refuse, but I chose to get up and work in the study instead. Late that night, Ethan called. The phone rang once, and then stopped. Strangely, I felt a sense of relief. At 4 a.m, I moved to the sofa to sleep. From the bedroom, I could hear Victoria sobbing uncontrollably. I immediately got dressed, opened my phone, and searched for nearby hotels. Even if there were no single rooms available, I was willing to pay $500 for a double. When I closed the hotel door behind me, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. The stars shone brilliantly in the sky. That's when I realized slamming the door loudly isn't a true departure. Quietly closing it with no intention of ever returning, that's when you've really left. In the days that followed, Victoria acted as if nothing had happened. She became even more attentive, asking about my work, my daily life, even showing interest in topics she used to dismiss, like tennis, model building, and my film reviews. Her newfound attentiveness only made me feel more exhausted. I began working overtime, sometimes even sleeping at the office. I really wanted to tell Victoria, "You don't have to do this. I truly want to leave you." No one leaves a relationship impulsively. The pain, the endurance, the countless emotions I've suppressed, you never saw any of it. Like a dam slowly eroded over time, you only noticed when it finally collapsed. Over the next month, I deliberately avoided her. She waited for me countless times outside my office, her tone humble, her attitude sincere, even as I grew increasingly distant. I gently told her we needed some space. We both knew our relationship was beyond repair, but she refused to face the reality of my feelings for her. Victoria clung to the denial, refusing to acknowledge the truth. Rain or shine, she would show up to wait for me. One evening, after taking on a heavy workload, a colleague brought me takeout. Looking out the window, she remarked, "The rain's pretty heavy. Your fiancée is waiting for you downstairs. Let her in." She said she doesn't dare. I frowned, grabbed an umbrella, and rushed downstairs. The rain was pouring. Victoria stood there drenched, looking like a wilted flower. I pulled her inside. "Are you insane?" Under the bewildered gaze of the security guard, I handed her a towel to dry her face. Victoria, her eyes lighting up, said excitedly, "Sincere, you still care about me." As I saw the triumphant glimmer in her gaze, I suddenly stopped what I was doing. "When the rain lightens up, go home," I said. Victoria froze. Her voice trembling, she said, "The thing with Ethan, it was my oversight. There's really nothing between us." Hearing that name, I suddenly felt a surge of humiliation. I tossed the towel at her and said, "I don't want to hear your explanation. If you want to mess up your own life, go ahead." She hadn't expected me to be so cruel. Her face darkened. "What will it take for you to forgive me? We're already engaged. Is it really worth all this over such a small matter?" I stared at her in silence. A small matter. Things had reached this point, and she still thought it was trivial. She thought I was being petty. Victoria realized what she'd said and quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, I just can't understand. There's nothing going on between him and me. Why has it blown up like this?" Her face showed a flash of confusion. Maybe she truly didn't understand. She'd already lowered herself, so why was I so adamant about drifting further and further apart? But did she really never think about it? Did I not have female friends? Did I not have buddies who invited me out for drinks, food, and fun? Did I not have moments of breakdown, times when I wanted to act recklessly and be comforted? I did. But whenever I went out to dinner, I always made sure there were at least 3 people. I never dined alone with a woman. I never forgot my responsibilities as a man toward my family, even during gatherings. When a coworker's computer broke, I didn't hover around offering help, because I had a fiancé at home. But what did I get in return? Over and over, I got Victoria's accusations. I too had waited for someone in the rain. I'd also been sick to the point where my gums swelled so badly that I couldn't close my mouth. At the hospital, everyone had someone accompanying them. I called Victoria, hoping she'd come and stay with me. But instead she snapped, "I told you to stop overthinking. Give us both some space. I told you to get that tooth pulled earlier, but no, you let it get worse. Now it's inflamed. Serves you right." I wanted so badly to beg her to show me some tenderness, like it was a charity. But then I heard Ethan's voice in the background. "Victoria, why aren't you moving? You'll get me killed." My phone slipped out of my hand and the screen shattered. I was sick, yet all she cared about was aiding someone else in their game. Though the physical wounds eventually healed, the emotional scar remained forever. Now, every arrow Victoria shot at me had ricocheted back at her. Since she called me cruel, I decided to send her a picture Ethan had privately sent to me. A photo of the watch I'd bought to commemorate our 3-year engagement anniversary. I asked her, "What does he mean by this? Even if you and he both explained to me in person later, why would Ethan send me this picture after getting drunk?" Finally, I said word by word, "Victoria, you put so much effort into trying to please me, but did you ever know that I hate soup the most? I think it's time for us to have a proper talk. End things amicably." She didn't say a word for a long time and disappeared into the rain. I made up my mind to go home and lay it all out with her, to make a decision for both our sakes. I believed Victoria would be waiting for me at home, but when I opened the door, there was no one there. The next day at noon, I got a call from Ethan. He told me Victoria had drunk herself into vomiting blood and was now in the hospital. I rushed over. She was lying on the bed, frail and weak like I'd never seen her before. "Sincere, you came. I'm sorry for worrying you," she said, her voice unusually humble. "You bastard!" Ethan's voice rang out from behind me. He punched me and shouted, "How could you do this to Victoria? Do you know she was soaked to the bone yesterday and cried while downing 3 bottles of wine?" I got up, glaring at him, then kicked him hard to the ground. Ignoring Ethan, I turned to Victoria and asked, "You'd rather destroy yourself than have one honest conversation with me? Or why run away?" "Can we wait until I've recovered?" she asked, her eyes pleading. It was painful to see. "Fine," I said, getting up to leave. "Sincere, can't you stay with me for a little while?" Her voice was filled with sorrow. "Stay? How ridiculous." But then Ethan, now back on his feet, glared at me with a murderous look. "If you left, she wouldn't die. Why do we even need someone like you around?" he sneered, practically kicking me out. I paused, then laughed bitterly. "See, I've always been the extra one." Even after Victoria recovered, she didn't come home. She messaged me saying the doctor advised her to avoid any stress for now. Ethan's punch had been hard. As I pressed a cold egg to my bruised face, I realized something. The egg had gone cold, just like the love between Victoria and me. Was I making a big deal out of nothing? I thought back to one evening during a college lecture break. The classroom had been noisy, and after finishing a design sketch for Victoria, I couldn't resist poking her on the back and asking, "Do you want to date me?" Her face was a mixture of surprise, shyness, and sweetness. I'll never forget that moment, or the time after graduation when I crossed countless miles to move to her city, and she cried into my shoulder. There was New Year's Eve, just after her grad school exams. I surprised her with a visit, setting off fireworks before emerging with the kitten she'd wanted for so long. I held it out and earnestly asked, "Once I have a stable job, will you marry me?" We even looked at houses together. When the agent asked what kind of layout she liked, she leaned on me and said, "Don't ask me, my husband will decide." She had always been good to me, until Ethan showed up. Grace once told me, "She hasn't cheated on you. After all these years, you two barely even fight. And now you're going to end things because she talked to another guy and had a few meals with him? Can you really let her go?" I just don't understand. Everything was fine. As life marched forward, all I needed to do was keep moving ahead. But why was Victoria so fixated on Ethan? I still remember the day she looked at me so intently. In that noisy classroom, we stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then, as if on impulse, she nodded, and I exhaled in relief, smiling triumphantly. Twirling my pen, I cocked my chin and said smugly, "Next time, don't be shy about asking your boyfriend questions. You can ask me anything." Oh, how I wish I could go back to that moment. Even Vicky texted me once saying, "The light in her eyes is gone when you look at her. She used to radiate so brightly, but now she's just a speck of dust in the universe." I tried so hard to recall the glowing image of her, but it was no use. That light, the brilliance I first saw when I met her, was gone. I choked back my emotion and replied, "You can't let go of your moonlit goddess, but I refuse to be just a fleeting stain." I always prided myself on being rational, never crying in front of her or showing any weakness. I believed I'd handled my emotions in the breakup with perfect composure. I thought I was reasonable. But the night I chain-smoked cigarette after cigarette, I realized just how much it hurt when Victoria decided to abandon me. From disappointment to arguments, then to estrangement, and finally heartbreak, it all led to the inevitable breakup. Some roads, once taken, have no turning back. Even though I still loved her, I knew we couldn't be together anymore. Love, after all, is finite. It can't withstand endless depletion. It was time for my dad's regular monthly checkup. Grace wanted to know why Victoria and I still hadn't gotten married. I thought for a moment and answered honestly, "Mom, maybe we're just not meant to be." Grace sighed, her face softening with a trace of sadness. "I just want you to be happy," she said, "to be cared for. Don't lose yourself." Tears filled my eyes. I took time off work and spent 3 days with my parents, taking them around the city. When it was time to say goodbye, I posted a photo of us together on social media. Victoria called me after seeing the post. "Your parents were visiting?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I posted it on social media. Besides, weren't you the one who didn't want to meet them? You were afraid they'd start pressuring us to get married." My parents genuinely liked Victoria. They were understanding about everything: wedding gifts, a home, even kids. All they wanted was the reassurance of a marriage certificate. But Victoria always said that getting married would feel like being chained down. She worried that pursuing her career would be met with endless questions from my parents. So I stopped bringing it up. Now I told her firmly, "Wait for me at the house. Let's stop stalling." When I opened the door, Victoria surprised me by pulling out a marriage certificate application. "Sincere," she said. "Let's get married." I was taken aback. "I've thought about this over and over," she continued. "I can lose everything else, but I can't lose you." Her words caught me off guard. After the initial shock, all I felt was exhaustion. For so long it had been me doing all the giving while Victoria took it for granted. Slowly I grew tired. Just like when my father was gravely ill, and I proposed to her with our marriage paperwork in hand. Back then she accused me of wanting to marry her only to bring good luck to a dire situation. That moment should have been the last straw, but I held on. Now she asked me, her voice trembling, "Sincere, will you marry me?" Her question lacked conviction. "No," I said. When those 3 words left my mouth, I felt a pang in my chest, but no regret. Victoria looked disappointed, but not devastated. She steadied herself against the couch and asked weakly, "When did you stop loving me?" I stayed silent. "Was it the day I gave Ethan that watch?" she pressed. Still I said nothing. "Or was it because I never paid attention to you? Not even knowing you hate cilantro?" I sighed. "Victoria, you know the answer. I understand what Ethan means to you, the love you can never have. You need time to let it fade, but you can't just ignore me whenever he's around. You indulge your feelings for him, even if only in your heart. Love is a one-way street. I was loyal, selfless, and sincere. I gave you everything. You shouldn't have treated me like a dog." She choked back sobs. "I know I was wrong. I really only love you," Victoria cried helplessly, but I shook my head. "No, you don't. The day I was grazed by a car and almost had an accident, I barely got a scratch. But thinking of you made the pain unbearable. I wanted you to notice, to be there for me. Even if you scolded me, I would have been happy. But you always pushed me away with indifference. You think men don't feel pain? You knew my every emotion but were too busy proving yourself to Ethan. Were you trying to show him how amazing you are? Or were you hoping he'd see how devoted I was to you and feel something? Or maybe you wanted to keep your options open." Victoria was speechless, shaking her head desperately. Looking at her, I finally understood. Falling out of love is never sudden. It's always the result of countless disappointments piling up until there's no love left to give. A knock at the door interrupted us. I looked through the peephole. It was Ethan. Turning to Victoria, I said, "Hide inside. If you claim there's nothing between you and Ethan, let's prove it. Let's see if he feels the same." Ethan stepped inside. Behind the house, I scanned the surroundings and asked, "Where's Victoria?" I tugged at the corner of my mouth and replied, "She's not here." Ethan pressed on, his tone sharp. "She blocked me. I went to her office to find her, but she avoided me. Why has she suddenly become like this?" He continued, relentless. "Later, I finally saw her at her best friend's place, but she told me she has a fiancé and asked me to back off." "But didn't you two break up at the hospital?" For the first time, Ethan showed a hint of defeat in front of me. Victoria was never like this before. She was always so proud, but after you hung up on her, she cried uncontrollably. Ethan let out a bitter laugh and said, "Turns out she really loves you that much." Suddenly, he stared directly at me, his gaze intense. "Are you planning to marry her?" I met his gaze, the unease and probing in his eyes unmistakable. It was clear why he had come today. He was afraid I would reconcile with Victoria. He hadn't given up on her yet. I asked, "Do you love her?" Ethan paused for a long time, then looked up with a bitter smile. "Yes." I realized too late that she's the one I love the most. "Do you know why your proposal with the marriage certificate failed?" Victoria asked for my opinion, but I had just gotten divorced at the time. How could I pass up the chance to ruin things for you? I chuckled, picked up my cat, grabbed the luggage I had already packed, and said, "You've been staying here for so long, and yet you're not allergic to cat fur? Well, I hope you can love Victoria well, assuming you can win her back." As I closed the door behind me, I heard a heart-wrenching scream. "Get out. I never want to see you again." Victoria's voice echoed behind me. I picked up my phone and changed her contact name from wife back to her full name. "If we can't grow old together, then let's part ways peacefully. From now on, we'll live separate lives, each seeking our own happiness." But I had underestimated how complicated things would become. I thought a clean break would be simple. I forgot that Victoria was a stubborn person. Just as she had once clung to Ethan, she now clung to me. In her mind, being dumped by someone she once had wrapped around her finger was a humiliation of the highest order. Even after I exposed Ethan's ulterior motives, she wouldn't stop texting me. Eventually, overwhelmed by her persistence, I turned off my phone. I planned to reclaim the house we had prepared for marriage, but it was clear from her behavior that she wasn't ready to let go. After some thought, I decided to check into a hotel. Once I finished showering, I opened my laptop to deal with the situation. If Victoria proved too troublesome, I'd simply put the house up for sale. But as soon as I turned on my phone, her call came through. "Sincere," she said firmly. "I'll ask you one last time. Is there really no chance for us to reconcile?" Without hesitation, I replied, "No." "All right, fine, you'll regret this." At first, I didn't understand what she meant. I knew I hadn't wronged her, so why would I regret anything? 3 days later, I returned to the house to discuss the matter. But when I tried to talk to her, Victoria barely acknowledged me, focusing instead on her phone. Frustrated, I shook my head and went inside to retrieve some clothes I had left behind. But when I opened the bedroom door, I was momentarily speechless. The bed was a mess, which was bad enough, but the trash can held a pair of soiled underwear. I took a deep breath, only to catch a faint whiff of an unmistakable scent lingering in the air, a mix of something floral and intimate. It was obvious this was the aftermath of last night's escapades. In that moment, my heart stopped. Up until now, I had only felt disappointment in Victoria, believing she was distant and unresponsive. But I never imagined she would disgust me to this extent. A woman with so much potential had chosen to throw herself into filth. I thought about the 10 missed calls she had made to me last night. Could this have been her twisted way of retaliating against me for not answering? The thought was absurd. I recalled the first glance she had given me when I walked in earlier. It held a trace of schadenfreude. Ah, so that's what it was about. I steadied my emotions, suddenly feeling much calmer. Facing this self-destructive woman, I asked her again when she planned to move out of the house. But instead of answering, she smirked triumphantly and said, "You saw it, didn't you, Sincere? Does it hurt so much you want me gone? By the way, Ethan is much better than you in bed." Her tone was laced with a smugness I had never heard before, and it made my skin crawl. I refused to let her see any sign of my discomfort. Clenching my teeth, I replied coldly, "Have some self-respect." I knew some people, especially women, would spiral into self-destruction after a failed relationship, blaming their downfall on being abandoned. It was illogical, but it happened. But no matter the reason, self-sabotage was never justifiable. Respect yourself, and others will respect you. I thought back to the first night Victoria and I had been intimate. I had prepared everything meticulously, treating it like a sacred ritual. When she shyly called me husband for the first time, I was overwhelmed with happiness, responsibility, and a sense of accomplishment, like I had won the highest honor. These feelings had driven me to be careful every time, ensuring nothing would harm her. I wasn't old-fashioned, but I always prioritized her feelings. I never imagined she would stoop so low and treat herself so poorly. Self-deprecation, utter foolishness. I spoke quietly. "Well, congratulations then, you got what you wanted." Watching Victoria revert to her condescending demeanor, it was as if the past few months of her regret and apologies were nothing but a farce. The lock clicked open. Ethan came in with his luggage and noticed my presence. A smug expression instantly spread across his face, his arrogant gaze declaring his triumph. I felt a sudden rush of inexplicable frustration in my chest. What a disgusting act. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then smirked lazily. "Ex-husband, not leaving yet? Or are you staying for dinner?" He laughed, pulling Victoria into his arms and kissing her. The word ex-husband rolled off his tongue with deliberate emphasis. Victoria only spoke after a moment. "Him? Not even close." I stood there silently, watching the two of them. Their posturing was clear. They were taking over my space. Ethan then tossed the keyring in his hand and caught it skillfully. "Honey," he said, "how about we change the locks? I really don't want to see unpleasant people anymore." I glanced over and noticed that he already had a copy of the house keys. My rationality began to crumble. Victoria raised an eyebrow and laughed wildly. "Got it. I'll call the locksmith later. What's there to be jealous about?" The two of them chatted in the living room, exuding a sickly sweetness. Every sentence, every glance was filled with affection. It hit me. The real joke here was me. Perhaps Victoria's so-called remorse was just my own wishful thinking. This was her true self unmasked, a blatant provocation telling me that my days of torment were merely a part of their little game of rekindling their old romance. In that moment, I realized I had been thoroughly played. I didn't want to waste another second on these two. I spoke up. "This house was bought by my parents as our marital home." Victoria chuckled lightly. "Yours? Come on, Sincere. What do you take me for? A convenient warm body?" She sneered. "This house is at least half mine. Without $50,000, don't think you can get rid of me so easily." The air froze. My teeth clenched audibly. Did this woman have no shame? Was she intent on obliterating even the faintest trace of good memories? Ethan crossed his arms and stepped in front of me. Patting me on the shoulder, he said condescendingly, "If I were you, I'd just transfer ownership of the house to Vicky already." He smirked. "How about this? Name your price. We'll take a loss and buy the house from you. After all, you know Vicky and I cleared up all our misunderstandings yesterday in bed." He glanced at Victoria, his lips curling into a smug grin. "I mean, I was her first man. It's only natural she couldn't forget me. Honestly, I feel a little bad that you were her fallback for 3 years. I couldn't hold back anymore. My fist flew. This fight was inevitable. I could put up with Victoria's betrayal. I could even accept my misplaced devotion. But I would not stand for Ethan mocking me after everything. A man can endure many things, but not humiliation. I used to sacrifice my pride, my individuality, and my stubbornness, all for one person. Now I understood the person I gave everything for was never meant to share a future with me. Some mistakes are clear from the beginning. The fight was brutal. To be more precise, it was savage. Ethan lost a few teeth and his jaw was dislocated. Victoria's nose was broken, blood streaming down her face. I ended up with a fractured rib. The incident escalated, and both families were called to the police station to take us home. Ethan, severely injured, would be reliant on feeding tubes for a long while. My parents had to pay a hefty sum to cover his medical bills. It was humiliating. The drama also exploded in our mutual social circles. Opinions were divided. Some condemned Victoria as shameless, while others accused me of being spiteful and petty. As I lay in the hospital bed, I began deleting so-called friends from my contacts. At the same time, I wondered why Victoria had to push things to such a destructive point. Was it resentment? Guilt? Revenge for her humiliation when she begged for my forgiveness? I couldn't figure it out. Perhaps for her, burning every bridge was the only way to prevent regret. The door to my hospital room swung open. To my surprise, Olivia walked in. She asked, "So what's your plan moving forward?" "I need to find a place to live," I replied weakly. Victoria said they'd need a month to move out of the house. She offered, "How about this? I have a vacant property. You know how busy I am with work anyway." I looked at her, surprised. I hadn't expected her to step in to help me at a time like this. Olivia had always been straightforward and fair, even when she was Victoria's best friend. She never took sides. But she noticed the small things like how I hated cilantro, and she never hesitated to call out Ethan's antics as problematic. There were many times I wanted to thank her, but the awkwardness of our dynamic as opposite genders held me back. Now battered and defeated, I finally spoke without reservation. "Don't you think I went too far?" She replied firmly, "No, I think you did the right thing." Her expression was serious. That was Olivia, always direct. "By the way," she added, "I've cut ties with Victoria." I forced a painful smile. Good. And just like that, I agreed to her offer. Olivia's proposal, I went to her house, only to discover that the apartment across the hall was also hers. Although the fight had left me bedridden for 2 months, I felt a strange sense of renewal, as if I had been reborn. Yet the after effects of the surgery and anesthesia began to show. After taking some antibiotics, I felt drowsy and weak. A cool sensation brushed against my forehead, and it seemed like someone was taking care of me. Initially, I thought it was my mother, who had insisted on staying to look after me. When I woke up again, the aroma of pork trotter's soup wafted in from the kitchen, and the pain in my body had subsided. I listened to the birds chirping outside the window and picked up my phone. Dozens of unread messages and missed calls awaited me. Some from colleagues, some from my friends, and of course, some from those who just wanted to gossip. Someone had even sent me a screenshot of Victoria's social media post. She was applying ointment to Ethan's wounds with a caption that read, "You are my hero." No wonder she always refused when I suggested we rewatch classic movies together. It wasn't that she didn't want to. It was that I didn't deserve it. I posted on my own social media, "From now on, anyone who sends me anything about that person, don't blame me if I cut ties with you." I threw off the blanket and tried to tidy myself up. When I walked to the kitchen, I saw Olivia standing there, watching over the soup. She noticed me and said, "Grace made this for you. She went out to buy groceries and asked me to make sure you drank it while it's still warm." She handed me a bowl. As I reached to take it, pain shot through me and I winced in agony. With a soft scoff, she said, "So clumsy. Let me feed you." With the gentlest care, she helped me to a recliner, propped me up with a cushion and said, "Don't get the wrong idea. This is part of my clinical training." I watched as she poured the soup into the bowl, cooled it for a moment, and even tested the temperature with her lips before feeding it to me spoonful by spoonful. It was the first time a girl had ever fed me, and my heart felt warm and bittersweet. Victoria had never treated me like this. When Olivia finished, she wiped my mouth gently. For a moment our eyes met, and we both froze. My heart skipped a beat. I thought to myself, "Sincere, you idiot. How can you be having such thoughts at a time like this?" Just then my mom walked in, breaking the moment. "Son, are you feeling better?" she asked. Olivia immediately stood up, blushing, and hurried out of the room. A wave of warmth surged through me. Perhaps in a lifetime we truly encounter two kinds of people, one who takes our breath away, and one who soothes our soul. My mom tidied up the room but was stumped when it came to taking care of Joy, my mischievous little cat. It wasn't that she disliked him, it was just that Joy had this habit of leaping into my arms to beg for attention. To my surprise, when he saw Olivia, he simply lay down at her feet, exposing his belly. Olivia, clearly smitten, said, "Come on, little guy, let's get you a bath." My mom helped me lie down and said, "You've been through so much over the years." Her words caught me off guard and I remained silent. "Sincere, you gave Victoria jewelry and gifts and she barely cared. But when she gave you a pair of cheap sneakers as a freebie, you were over the moon. That's when I knew you were too selfless in love." I felt a mix of bitterness and shame. "Mom, please don't say any more." She sighed. "I just want you to cherish the right person when she comes along." Of course I understood what she meant, but Sincere could never be Ethan. If love had to be won through manipulation, I wouldn't want it. I could love humbly, I could compromise for love, but I would never lose myself to fight or scheme for it. I lay back in bed, determined to delete everything related to Victoria. But just as I opened my social media, I saw her latest post. Turns out she had gone to watch the remastered version of A Chinese Odyssey. It was a picture of her holding hands with Ethan, captioned, "The first time we watched this movie, it was in the school cafeteria. Now for the remastered version, it's still you by my side." I glanced at the tickets I had once booked for us to see the same movie. Memories of her film review came flooding back. Love or not, does it need a reason? Whether you embark on the journey or not, do you truly have a choice? Playful and romantic like Zixia, every smile and frown is full of emotion. If you ever feel a strange flutter when you see someone riding on a cloud, it must be because I've left a mark on your heart as a memory. Anger simmered within me. I fought to control my emotions and sent her a single question mark. But when the notification popped up that I could no longer leave comments, I froze. She had blocked me. She really would stop at nothing to get under my skin. At that moment, Olivia returned with Joy in her arms. She set him down and was about to leave. My mom quickly stopped her. "Olivia, why don't you stay for dinner?" She smiled and replied, "I have things to take care of, Grace." My mom turned to me and said, "Sincere, ask her to stay. Aren't you two still friends?" Her eyes bore into me, practically screaming, "How can you be so clueless?" I looked at Olivia and said softly, "Listen to my mom." She chuckled and said, "Let me dry Joy's paws first." Olivia carefully dried Joy's paws and said, "I used to have a big orange tabby just like him. He ran away." I asked, "Did he have any distinguishing marks?" Suspicion stirred in my heart. Without hesitation, she replied, "Yes, he had a heart-shaped black spot under his armpit." I even joked with the pet shop owner, saying I hoped he'd help me find my destined one. As she finished her sentence, she suddenly paused, looked at me, and then, as if we had the same thought, she lifted Joy's front leg. Sure enough, there was a heart-shaped marking. Her eyes filled with disbelief. "Joy is the cat I adopted," I said softly. She knelt down, hugged Joy tightly, and kept thanking me. My mom beamed and said, "It seems this really is destiny." It seemed destined. My mom sat next to me, smiling with joy. Over the next few days, my fracture healed well. Though Olivia was incredibly busy, she always made time to visit me. She even brought me some updates about Victoria. Apparently, Victoria was pregnant. Ethan had joined her family's company and was acting like a big shot, which had earned him plenty of enemies. Back in college, Ethan was never a standout student. His popularity came from his roguish charm and underhanded tactics. I'd always held a grudge against my parents for the settlement money they had to pay on my behalf. Why should they? I was merely defending myself, yet because of Ethan's shamelessness, my parents had to use their hard-earned money to settle things for the sake of my future. After much contemplation, I remembered Ethan had returned to the country after a rather miserable divorce. If he had done nothing wrong given his brazen nature, he wouldn't have come back empty-handed. His divorce must have been more complicated than it seemed. While I worked hard on my recovery, I also asked someone to look into Ethan's divorce records. Olivia often came over to cook with Grace. I was genuinely surprised that such a cool and composed girl could be such an excellent cook. Her braised chicken was particularly outstanding. Grace subtly hinted that I should spend more time with Olivia, but with my old injuries still lingering, I felt unworthy of such a wonderful woman. I always avoided the topic. Through Victoria, I became more certain of one thing. Liking someone can be one-sided, but love requires mutual effort. Pursuing Olivia now felt too rushed. So a month later, I took Joy home with me. Victoria was being her usual dramatic self, even managed to break the TV she had just bought. But I was no longer affected. Oddly enough, Joy, like me, showed no reaction upon seeing Victoria. Humans can suppress their emotions, but cats shouldn't be able to. Victoria noticed this too, staring at Joy in astonishment. Animals don't speak, but sometimes they understand more than we do. Victoria softly asked, "You're disappointed in me, aren't you?" I wasn't sure what game she was playing now. I shook my head and replied, "I used to not want to see you at all. Now I can't even stand anything that carries your scent. I've listed the house for sale. There's no need for more pointless talk." As I said this, I realized I no longer felt any hesitation or self-pity. Surprisingly, Victoria didn't storm off in anger. Instead, she looked as though she wanted to say something but ultimately chose silence, walking away without a word. I could sense she had a lot weighing on her mind, but I didn't want to involve myself in her life anymore. I knew that because of Ethan, her relationship with her parents had soured, her friends had cut ties with her, and even her job was in jeopardy. The sound of the door closing behind her felt like a final seal, a representation of the endless cycle of her approaching and my retreating, a cycle so repetitive that my heart had grown numb. And when numbness turns into brokenness, everything becomes calm, unshaken. She left, and I moved on. It was inevitable. That evening, Olivia came over. She glanced around the house, then handed me a bowl of pork, corn, and chicken foot soup. This time she spoke up. "Sincere, could you come with me to the hospital tomorrow? The hospital is looking for legal consultation, and I think you could help." Without hesitation, I agreed. I didn't expect to run into Victoria and Ethan there. Victoria looked surprised to see me but said nothing. Ethan, however, couldn't resist his smugness. "Doctor," he began, "you said last week that we should come in monthly for checkups. So is my wife pregnant? Is the baby healthy? Is it stable?" Then turning to me, he mockingly added, well, if it isn't an old acquaintance." In the past, I would have been furious. But now I felt as though my heart had been mended, perhaps even shielded by Olivia's gentle care. With unexpected calmness, I smiled and replied, "Yes, indeed. Congratulations to you both. After all, I took care of your woman for 3 years and returned her to you in the same condition." Ethan, who had always relied on his shamelessness, often played the good cop to Victoria's bad cop, leaving me frustrated and at my wits' end. But now, I had grown a thick skin. I used to think the opposite of love was hate, then indifference. Now I believe it's forgetting. Once I forgot every little detail of the past, I no longer held back when responding to Victoria. Ethan's expression briefly darkened before he regained composure and said with a sneer, "Of course, we'll send you an invitation to the wedding. If only you weren't so useless, Victoria and I wouldn't have what we do today." I retorted with a smirk, "Exactly, just like a pair of worn shoes. Even if they've stepped in dirt, a good cleaning can make them a limited edition again. Just make sure they don't fall apart. Once a limited edition shoe breaks, it's destined for the trash." Ethan was so enraged he finally dropped his act, slamming his fist on the table. "Who are you calling worn shoes?" I looked at him with a faint smile. Yesterday, I had received the investigation report. Ethan's divorce wasn't due to irreconcilable differences as he claimed. It turned out he had been gambling, cheating, and even dabbling in drugs while abroad. His ex-wife was pursuing legal action, and he had essentially fled back to the country. Victoria finally spoke up. "Enough. Let's not waste time on nonsense. Other patients are waiting." Ethan wasn't happy about it, but rolling my eyes, I forced a fake smile and kept up my facade. But when Olivia read the report, her face suddenly turned serious. "Victoria, this child should never have existed," she said, her voice striking like a clap of thunder. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "What nonsense are you spouting, Olivia?" he retorted. Olivia, unfazed, replied, "Ethan, don't you know what you're hiding from Victoria?" She handed the report to Ethan. I glanced at it and wow, an STD. Ethan's expression changed dramatically. Ignoring Victoria's presence, he shouted, "Olivia, you're lying!" "I've already taken care of this." Sweating profusely, he turned to Victoria and explained, "Vicky, I got infected abroad by accident. Trust me, it was just during a trip. I wasn't careful with sanitation." Olivia stared at him silently before saying, "What a joke. You're already in the second stage and you expect me to believe it was an accident? Save that for someone else." Victoria pointed at Ethan, biting her lip, unable to speak for a long time. Finally, she threw the medical report and her handbag onto the ground. I stared in disbelief. I had only ever planned to walk away from these two cheaters and never see them again. But this sudden twist left me stunned. Victoria, proud and dignified as she was, had been utterly humiliated. Her eyes burned with anger, her whole body trembling, unable to say a word. Ethan, seeing her reaction, kept explaining, "I swear it was that woman. She cheated on me and infected me, and I only came back afterward. I had no idea she was sick. It was her. It must have been her." His words became increasingly incoherent as panic set in. Desperate, he grabbed Victoria's hand. "Vicky, believe me. Let's not have this child. We can start over." I couldn't hold back any longer. "Mr. Ethan," I said, breaking the tension, "I have access to your divorce case. Want me to print it out for everyone to see? That would ruin you completely." Victoria yanked her hand away. "You liar. You planned this from the very beginning, didn't you? You waited until I was drunk to take advantage of me, then blackmailed me with my family and career. Otherwise, how could I, Victoria, end up being the laughingstock of the world?" Her anger boiled over. She grabbed the scalpel near Olivia and lunged forward. Olivia quickly restrained her and shouted at Ethan, "Get out! Do you want someone to die here?" Ethan hesitated, but Victoria's fury couldn't be contained any longer. Struggling violently, she tried to break free. Olivia slapped her hard and glared at her. "You have no principles. Breaking up with someone and losing all dignity like this, and you blame others?" I frowned slightly as Victoria collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Afterward, Olivia led us to a lounge. Once inside, I turned to Olivia and said, "Olivia, could you give us a moment alone?" She hesitated, furrowing her brows, but eventually nodded and left. After she was gone, Victoria's voice trembled as she said, "Sincere, this time I really messed up." I sighed, suddenly feeling like this woman was a stranger to me. After a long pause, she finally spoke again. "I'm sorry." This time it seemed genuine. I saw the despair in her eyes, and for a moment I was taken aback. But I felt nothing. Truly nothing. Ever since the day I realized I loved Victoria but found her indecisive, I had resolutely walked away. I had already come to terms with the consequences. Everything she'd done afterward was just stripping away the last shred of dignity between us. I didn't need her apology anymore, not even if she owed it to me. So I asked indifferently, "Why are you saying this now?" She hadn't expected my cold reaction. She began murmuring to herself, "When I got together with Ethan, I thought I was just trying to get back at you. I went about my life, watching TV, drinking milkshakes, eating barbecue. My appetite stayed the same, sometimes even bigger. I never drank to drown my sorrows or lost weight from missing you. I ate, played, slept, worked, just as usual. I chuckled. So, in short, you were doing well. To sum it up poetically, laughing at the clouds, savoring the green plum's aroma. Her eyes suddenly reddened. No. One weekend, Ethan and I went shopping for household items. I was carrying 3 bags when I suddenly realized that the silly boy who would rush to help me, who couldn't bear to see me suffer even a little, who would hug me no matter the occasion, was gone. Even if I tried to act nonchalant, my body remembered. She grabbed my hand suddenly. Can you forgive me? The warmth of her hand was familiar, so familiar. For a brief moment, I felt what I had waited for so long, but now I didn't want it anymore. I immediately pulled away, but she grabbed me again. Just then Olivia walked in. Taking one look at the scene, she awkwardly said, "Oh, are you two making up?" Then, realizing the tension in the room, she turned and left. Seizing the moment, I shoved Victoria away. Seeing her trying to cling to me again, I said firmly, "That's enough, Victoria. Honestly, do you know why I didn't react earlier when Ethan got so worked up he almost caused a tragedy? Do you want me to spell it out for you?" Tears streaming, Victoria choked out, "But now you're all I have left." I shook my head and replied, "Do you know what the hardest thing in life is? Reaching for the stars with bare hands, loving but not being loved in return. The world is vast, yet no one will encounter me again." I never understood this phrase before, but now I do. Back then, I couldn't have you. Now, you can't meet me. It was all predestined. I noticed the light in Victoria's eyes starting to fade. Slowly but surely, she calmed down, leaving only a sense of desolation. I continued, "Victoria, I never looked back from the beginning, and I never will." Her eyes were filled with despair. I stood up and said one last thing. "Pass this on to Ethan for me. He once talked about broken mirrors being mended, but now I want to tell him, a broken mirror, even if repaired, will never be the same. There's always a crack, waiting for the next fracture to be even more devastating." As I walked out the door, I didn't turn back. It was finally over. When I returned to Olivia's place, she sat there, expressionless. She looked upset. After finishing her work, she raised her head and asked me, "Do you still have feelings for Victoria?" "No," I replied. She let out a cold snort and said, "Then why did you let her hold your hand? Why did you talk to her for so long? Just because she was deceived, you forgot how she betrayed you?" I didn't know how to respond. I just found it amusing how someone as calm and composed as Olivia could be so unreasonable and yet oddly endearing. I teased her on purpose. "Well, I don't have a new girlfriend yet, do I?" To my surprise, this comment made Olivia so angry she stood up, her face turning bright red. You, she stammered. After a while, she sat back down in frustration and said, "Forget it, Sincere. Your name must mean you're sincerely stupid." Then she got up and walked out. As she passed me, she added, "I'm not coming to your place tomorrow. We both need some space." Back home, I skipped dinner and sat on my bed, staring at the tulips on the balcony. Suddenly, I remembered how Victoria and Olivia had completely different attitudes toward flowers. Victoria would buy ready-made bouquets from a florist, while Olivia would carefully choose individual stems from a flower market. One would throw them away the moment they lost freshness. The other would nurture them as if they were her own children. It hit me then, love is different from liking. If you like a flower, you'll pick it. If you love a flower, you'll water it. At that moment, I was sure Olivia had fallen for me. But still, I couldn't bring myself to confess. I had no clue how to approach her tomorrow. Feeling stuck, I called my mom. She picked up and bluntly said, "If she doesn't want to see you, then she won't see Patience either? Stop being so spineless. Chasing a girl is all about not being afraid to lose face." She was right. Inspired, I dug out my medical records and flipped through them absent-mindedly, only to stumble upon a big secret. During the time Olivia had been taking care of me, I'd almost learned to decipher her cryptic handwriting. In my records, there were 3 entries she had written during the 3 days she stayed with me in the hospital. Day 1. "The first time I saw you, you were fireworks and I was ash. It will take a lifetime to clean the hearth of my heart." Day 2. The 3 parts aren't 3 parts water and 7 parts dust, but 3 parts of the moonlight that graces the world. Day 3. The day I wanted to confess, you gave flowers to her instead. I wasn't sad, I just wanted to quietly watch you find happiness. I was stunned, and then sweetness surged through me. Her steady, subtle kindness toward me, gentle and understated, suddenly made sense. Everything she did, though seemingly ambiguous, had a perfectly reasonable explanation. And so, I realized why I had to see her tomorrow. It was a kind of longing, a persistent concern, a magnetic pull that I couldn't resist. The next day, I dressed up in an absurdly mismatched outfit, bright green shorts and a suit jacket. I deliberately timed my arrival to coincide with her shift and entered under a special consultation slot. When my turn came, Olivia didn't look up, and I didn't say anything. I waited until she couldn't resist glancing at me, only to see my peacock-like ensemble. She immediately got angry and asked, "Why are you dressed like this?" I replied, "What's wrong with it? I just wanted to see if I still have any market value." When I removed the suit jacket, leaving an even more ridiculous fake tie and shirt underneath, she grabbed a blanket to cover me up. I brushed it off, pointed at the medical records, and asked, "What do these mean?" She denied it. "They're just notes about medication." I chuckled. "Medication? Then let's head to the pharmacy and fill the prescription." Caught off guard, Olivia became flustered and said, "Let's talk when I'm off work, okay?" I gave her no chance to escape. "You said you weren't going home today. If you dare to step out of here, we're done." "Sincere, stop pretending to be a patient," she retorted. "I am your patient, am I not?" I countered, leaning back with my legs crossed, chewing gum like a rogue. "Spill it, what does it mean?" She had never seen me so assertive before and suddenly turned into a compliant little lamb. "Do I really need to say it? Didn't I already write it down?" "I didn't understand," I replied. "Read it to me." "Seriously?" she asked. I nodded. And so this little lady actually started reading aloud. But halfway through, my face turned red. I hadn't expected such a shy girl to read it so boldly. I quickly interrupted her. "When did you start liking me?" She replied, "The first moment I saw you." I was speechless. "Then why did you call me a muscle-headed idiot back then?" She burst out laughing. "Because I was the real idiot. My slowness gave you and Victoria a chance to cross paths." "Right," I said, smiling. "Almost missed you," I said as I playfully tapped her nose. "They say there are 2 things in life you should never miss, the last train home and someone who loves you deeply. The train is you, and so is the person, am I right?" Olivia smiled and replied, "Yes." I locked the infirmary door from the inside. Even if the sky were to fall, I wouldn't care. I couldn't resist leaning in for a kiss. Epilogue. Victoria had some trouble at work. After resigning, she decided to go abroad for treatment. Ethan, on the other hand, was sent to jail by her own hands. The charges were quite severe, and he was sentenced to at least 10 years. Myself and Olivia had already met each other's parents and officially tied the knot. That day, I received a package along with a debit card. Inside the package was the ring I had once given her, and the card had $200,000 on it. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of disbelief. Smiling, I handed the card to Olivia, turned around and tossed the ring into the city canal.